Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Thank You for Spore-ing, the show that, to our knowledge, has never set fire to a lodge. I don't know, Chad. Have we set fire to a lodge?
Not to my knowledge either.
Okay, great.
I don't think we've set fire to anything, lodge or otherwise.
I hope things aren't burning down because we're here podcasting every week about this show. That would be a shame. Anyway, welcome back to the show. We are, of course, following along with HBO's The Last of Us as it is airing season 1 here in March of 2023. And I gotta say, this show overall has just been such a pleasant breeze. This year is richer for having this show.
Yeah, I feel like we talk about it every week because it really has been just like mind-blowing how well they have adapted this show, especially considering the sort of stereotypical dearth of quality video game adaptations. And this one has not only met those expectations and exceeded them, and just like it's become one of the best things on TV, video game adaptation or otherwise, which is no small feat.
I really agree with that. And you were telling me just before we hit record that the production on this show was actually quite lengthy.
Yeah, I think I read about 211 days of filming, or at least primarily, and then maybe they went back for additional reshoots and stuff like that. But it was over about a year of time all told that they were filming and building sets and doing all that kind of stuff for this show. And so they really went all in.
Yeah,
great.
I mean, I think you can tell in the finished product that it's just got that extra level of polish, pretty much in every facet.
There's something to be said about finding the right people for the job, because obviously Neil Druckmann has proven himself many times over with his work with Naughty Dog, both in the Uncharted series and in both the Last of Us games and Left Behind DLC. And then Druckmann having made Chernobyl a few years ago, and that
I'll stop you right there. You said Druckmann making Chernobyl.
Yeah, and Mazin making Chernobyl a few years ago, and it being the enormous success that it was, and as well received as it was, to put the two of those people together and to have them really jump in with a love for the original source material and a desire to do it right and not just put the game on the screen. They've made all the right decisions so far, and I really can't wait to talk about this episode, but then to look next week and talk about how they bring it home for the end of season 1.
Yeah, I think we'll do a slightly longer overall, episode either at, next week, or do like a shorter, just overall season recap at some point following the finale, because there's going to be a lot to talk about. There's going to be a lot of emotions. We'll have to maybe we do next week's episode and then we sit with our emotions for a week and then come back to it. But I know I'll miss doing this podcast, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. This is really the dream team, both you and me, and also Druckmann and Mazin, like you're saying. I feel like I feel really, truly great when we're chatting, and also just seeing what they were able to accomplish, to your point, is remarkable. And this episode, which was tonally, I think, even darker, or the darkest the show has been, would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, we'll talk about the specific moment later, but this episode might have resulted in the most tears from me.
Wow.
And I mean, that being said, most of the episodes have made me cry in one respect or another.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the one that maybe hit me deepest emotionally so far.
Okay, yeah, we'll get into that because there's like happy
Yeah,
tears, there's sad tears, there's oh no tears, uh-oh tears, and oops
right.
tears, I guess. So we'll figure out which one of Chad's tears were shed at which point here.
Because
But
there's lots of them.
oh yeah, I mean, I cry. I do often find myself crying. I think we bonded over this in talking about various movies on Cinescope too. Anytime there's a strong connection between characters, and definitely at the end of this episode, when the two characters reunited. I mean, it's no spoilers. Joel and Ellie get back
Right.
together at the end here, and are well enough to, well, traumatized and well enough to move on together. Was definitely a tearjerker. So normally we would talk about what we've learned over the last week from the last episode. I know you and I are listening to the official podcast, which is also going episode by episode. I would say as long as our listeners are, checking that out, that's going to be the primary source versus us doing the recaps. So because we are probably going to spend a little bit more time in the spoiler section of this episode, just to talk about some of the themes in this episode and how they may relate to the overall thing. Let's just skip all of that. Except the mall in real life was one story. And that was really cool. They had to do it with CGI. It was nuts last week.
Yeah.
That's why production was a year, actually.
Yeah, it was all the mall.
All the mall. But but let's get into it. What were your overall thoughts for episode 8, which was titled When We Are in Need?
I said last week, looking forward to this episode, that I knew it was going to be a really tough episode emotionally. And I mean, I was right. And I don't think that's a surprise for anybody who has played the games, who knew what was coming. To see Scott Shepherd
Yes.
as David, and to see how he did have that sort of charm about him that then turned kind of sick and uh, made me angry. And you could understand how he could sort of manipulate a following the way he does, but then turn against them in a couple of key moments that we see as well. And the way he treats Ellie, really outstanding acting, really believable characters. And it just, again, it adapts the game really well. And I felt a lot of things and got angry at a lot of things, and it was really great.
Yeah, I think this is one of those episodes. I think it was Gene Park, who's a video game correspondent for Washington Post, tweeted in advance because the series was given to the press early that, going into this episode, he thought this was going to be the episode that video game fans love the most from the season. And I understand why he said that, because looking back, I do think that it was the most directly adapted. There's a lot of things I wasn't expecting, I guess, to be exactly in it, and it is exactly in this episode. All the various Ellie meets David, James or AKA Buddy Boy, gets sent back for the medicine. He comes back with the medicine. Then Ellie goes on her way. She gets back to Joel. Then she has to lead the people away. Then all of that is in the every beat is in the episode, as well as the establishing shot where we learn a little bit more about who these people are. So really just the way it was crafted was really good, but it's mostly shot for shot. A lot of the best moments from this part in the game, having just played it, and again, I'm streaming on YouTube in the week leading up, and that's available there. This is great. This was a great direct adaptation, but I don't know. Ooh, would it be my favorite of the overall season? Is it currently our favorite episode of the season?
I would say no for me. And having said that, I don't know if I could tell you what my favorite episode of the
Oh,
season
that's
so
the
far has been.
pressure. The onus is on.
But looking at, I don't know, it depends on what you want to qualify as favorite. Is like favorite the one that is the most literal adaptation of the game? That's not necessarily my preference.
Mhm.
Is favorite the one that makes me feel the best? Is favorite the one that makes me cry the most? Like, I don't know.
Ooh, if it was that would be this episode, right?
That's true. That's true. It would. But there's a lot of different ways I could sort of interpret favorites. But and I'm not going to like search for an answer for that
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
now.
No, that's okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I can see why those looking for a straight adaptation would actually find a lot of joy in this episode, particularly like I think it takes it a step further in trying to tell characters that are realistic, that aren't just a video. Like David does not just have to be a video game villain. They really make him, they really make you understand kind of exactly what you said, how he's able to manipulate the following, how he's able to do what he does. And you do see a man, I think, that you understand in a weird, twisted way is doing what he has had to do to survive and bring his kin, so to speak, along with him to get to that place. You don't agree with it, but you can see where it would be a realistic offshoot. In a sad, sad way. So yeah, a lot of love for this episode. And let's kind of get into that. I want to ask, as the episode begins and David is giving a sermon, and we meet these people, we see, essentially the episode's big bad or big bad group, and they're at a faith meeting. What do you think? What did you get out of sort of this introduction into these people?
Well, this is something, aside from the scene itself, this is something that's new to the show, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe David is explicitly like a preacher or a pastor in the game, right?
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that is a change, and that is a very intentional, I think, sort of dig at some church groups, some church leaders today. I mean, looking at some examples in the Catholic Church, and I'm not trying to paint with any broad strokes here. I myself am a Christian and spent many hours at church today, but to see how people abuse that power, to see how in the Catholic Church, in the Southern Baptist Church, there is these people who take those positions of sort of authority and then abuse it and are not necessarily called out for it in the way that they should. We see examples of that in this episode, and so it is a timely sort of character in that way, and how they have adapted him, and really it makes the character make even more sense, I think, because if you look at this as the apocalypse, in which it kind of is, and I mean, in this sermon that he's giving at the beginning, he's preaching from Revelation, which is all about the end times, and you're looking at this group of people who've suffered a lot, who've lost, who are hungry, and they're looking for the hope that you would turn to a god or a religion or some sort of faith experience for relief or comfort from those things. And so David giving that sermon, that particular sermon, to this girl who's lost her father and these people who've lost this man from their community, it shows that he knows the buttons to push. And I'm trying to phrase this in the right way that's not going to get people angry at me, because I don't think that any person as a pastor who would give this message is necessarily being manipulative, but clearly we learn through the course of the episode that David is.
Yes.
So yeah, I just think it's really timely, and I think that's a really interesting change.
Yeah, I think too, as we peel back the layers of the religious element to this, I do agree it's a timely change, but I also think we are able to see it's a cautionary tale as much as anything, more than a hard rebuke or a swift rebuke of organized religion in any sense. I think it's more about a caution of how a well-spoken man who seems to be kind and polite is able to, as you say, like, manipulate or to use religion and to use scripture specifically to lead a group of people into kind of his own selfish, wayward means. And we find out towards the end of the episode, he doesn't even believe in this stuff.
Right.
And he actually straight up says that to Ellie, is essentially religion, it was the way for him to find a way by means of exercising his violence within, and that kind of took a dark, controlling turn. But his community, I don't doubt that they're starving, they're weak, They need hope. They're weak in multiple levels. You can say they're not emotionally strong. They need a leader. They aren't several leaders, as we've seen other groups seem to have a lot of people who could be the leader. It seems like David's it, and this is mostly manifested in the character of James, who I love that we're going to be able to talk about. Finally seeing Troy Baker, Joel in the video games get to act was really exciting for this show. But even James is really actively thinking twice and seeming to struggle with what should be a clear choice to defy David, and sort of he's hesitating at every step. These people are what David calls them, sheep, in the most like applicable sense, where he does tell them what to do and they give him that power. It's very interesting to see kind of the dynamics at play, but it's no more a rebuke of organized religion, I think, than just a continual essay on how people interact with each other and how people are going to seek and obtain power and then use it for good or evil.
Well, it's very similar to Kathleen from a few episodes back. There was that moment when Perry is like, do you really think we should pursue Henry and Sam right this second? We've got other priorities. We've got a perimeter established. He's not going to escape. And Kathleen's like, well, he's not my fifth priority, Perry. And so she's questioning his faith, his dedication to the cause at hand. And in some ways, David is doing the same thing here. There's that moment where Troy is saying, why not just Troy, where James is saying,
our best friend Troy, who
right,
sometimes comes on the show,
fellow podcaster Troy Baker, where James is questioning David and says, like, why not just leave this girl to die? Like, why do we have to take her back in any way? What if that's God's will? And here the leader of their community, who's not just the leader but who's the pastor, turns to him and without saying a word shows, how dare you question me, who has shown myself to be the teacher of you, like the faith teacher of you. So it's again just sort of questioning the faith, questioning the dedication. Like, are you really saying that you have authority further than I do over the situation?
Or how can you say you know what God's will is more than me?
Exactly.
The pastor,
Yes, and that's actually what I was trying to say. But
I got it. I got exactly what you're putting down, because that's the most fascinating nuance here, and all the tiny little moments throughout this episode. The reason that David thinks the way that he does and is demanding that Ellie be kept alive is because David knows how weak the group is, and he's seeking, as he comes on to Ellie, to be a fellow leader. He has found somebody. He knows that the group is not going to make it, and not just because they're starving. He sees a real potential for growth in some twisted ways, but in some very logical ways of expanding his own strength. Essentially, through, if he can manipulate a stronger world person like Ellie, then together he secures his power among these people, and also has somebody to just talk to. Like, if you're it's lonely at the top, essentially.
Right.
And it's so interesting to see that James is making these great points. She's another mouth to feed. Like, they really are struggling to feed some mouths. But David, to be like, what if it's God's will that she dies, is the perfect foil to this pastor who's selfishly going after Ellie, because Ellie is his way of continuing his way of doing things. Essentially, like, it's not, David is acting very selfishly and in ways that he's not communicating to the others. Just like it's all a smokescreen. Many of the people here don't know what they're really eating for dinner every night. Right. And even that one girl is like, can we bury my father tomorrow? And David has to like clearly say like, well, the ground's too cold. We'll bury him, in a few months or whatever he says.
Yeah.
Like, hello. So it's nice because it removes some culpability for a lot of these people. but at the same time, it's just all this one big like tiers and tiers of manipulation with David at the top. And it's interesting though, because he senses that his people are dying. You can really get that from the performance by Scott Shepherd. Like you can really sense that he had a lot of hope that he could bring Ellie around. A lot of misplaced confidence in himself. But you can see it working on somebody a little less strong than Ellie, too.
It's also interesting. I have a question. Do you
Yeah.
think that David himself is eating human meat?
That's an interesting question.
Because, I mean, early in the episode, he actually has this conversation with James about how they do have some stored meat. Whether he's being serious in that moment, I have no reason to doubt that he would be having an actual conversation with actual facts in this moment. He says, we have some venison, we have some other things. It would maybe last a week among all of us. And so there's some food, it's just running low. And now they have these fresh dead bodies that they can cook and eat. And then later, after they come back with the deer after their encounter with Ellie, and everybody's been waiting on him to arrive to eat their food. And then you look at his bowl versus everybody else's bowl, and it's a mound of food over his bowl where everybody else just has a few bites.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. Oh, he has an enormous
Oh
serving.
God, he's
huge.
It's
And
good
so
to be
I just
the
had the
king.
thought, like, what if he's saving the real stuff for himself and making everybody else eat the human meat?
Well, that would be another way of showing why they're growing weaker, presumably. I have no reason to believe that human meat is less nutritious than animal meat, sadly. But you can see why, that speaks to if they're not, eating the proper whatever, non-human meat. You can see why the group is growing weaker because he's nourishing himself, both
Mhm.
both spiritually and whatever
Yeah.
vitamin-ly.
Yeah. But on the other
Medically.
hand, I also
Yeah.
think it would be just as disturbing if he had developed a taste for it and was eating the most human meat. So,
This guy has so many layers. This guy has so many layers of darkness within him. I mean, we haven't even touched on the pedophile angle either yet.
oh, yeah.
And knowing that, and that's terrifying, and I will address it later when we get to that scene with Ellie. But and that's also quite a bit in the game. But what they added for the show was that he was a former teacher too,
Mhm.
the former math
Oh,
teacher.
gosh.
And I know when you think about it, it's extra disgusting, and you're just like, wow, this guy's running this place. But moving to let's follow the episode again. Although all of that overview was very obviously valid and interesting. When we find that Joel's okay. Well, not okay. Joel is still not conscious in this episode, but I'm grateful for the whatever 2 minutes total that we did get during last week's episode. Again, knowing that it wasn't initially in the cards to
Mhm.
have that scene, it takes the onus off this episode to give us that really like Joel is bleeding out and unless intervened, like will not live aspect and kind of slide into a more comfortable but still uneasy. Okay, Joel is not well. He's kind of running a fever, but the worst part is over kind of
Mhm.
aspect.
Yeah, he's still not awake. It's still scary. Ellie is still having to fend for herself. And when I say fend for herself, she hasn't really had to start to do that yet. We see her eating the last sort of morsel of food that they have left, and it's only a few bites, and she leaves a little bit for Joel, despite him still being asleep. And that's when she does decide, I've got to go out and I've got to go get food for us. Like that, there's no other option. This is the last of what we've got. So that's a really I really like how we see that sort of decision process, because my memory of the game is we cut to winter and Ellie's just sort of like hunting a rabbit, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and then she does eventually spot a buck, but seeing
yeah.
her, well, and all of what you're just saying about the decision to go out and protect them, a lot of it's wordless. A lot of
Hmm.
it is Bella Ramsey, kind of just like having these thoughts while there's no dialogue.
Hmm.
She talks to unconscious Joel a couple of times throughout the episode, but a lot of it is just wordless. She opens the door, leads with the rifle. It's a great shot of the door opening and the rifle tip sticking out, and she's like ready to go hunting. Oh my God, I'm gonna catch me something. And then trips and falls flat on her face in the snow. It's like her first time out, and poof, just woo, soft flump face plant. Just the level of humor in that little bit, like, oh, I'm a big old hunter and I'm gonna and then she just biffs it.
Right.
Just so good because again, she's young. She's 14. Nobody should have to hunt for food for themselves and their father figure in the wilderness like this. But this is the world we live in. And she actually shoots the buck, actually one shot kill. Unlike me in the game the other night. I think the thing about the game is, I really would doubt it's possible to one hit kill it because no matter where you hit it, the whole point is you then follow the trail of blood to get to the town essentially.
Right.
So
Right.
so yeah, you are following it, but seeing the trail of blood in the snow in this episode, it's like wow, like again, directly to getting us where we need to go.
Something that hadn't occurred to me until watching this episode was that we didn't get any bow and arrow in the show. I mean, at least not to this point. I wouldn't expect them to add it in the next episode. And it makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard enough to become adept at one weapon, let alone a whole arsenal of them.
Oh, right. Yeah. And where would you store it?
Right. It's not like video game pockets.
Yeah, or video game backpacks where there's like one is
Right.
like stretched. You need like extra straps.
Yeah, a nail and hammers hanging over here, and some bombs over here, and
Oh
a
yeah.
weapon here and a weapon here. Yeah.
Yeah, a nail and hammer, and then it has to also accommodate a baseball bat and a hammer and nails,
Right.
and like
Right.
other whatever your melee weapon slot is. It has to fit them all indiscriminately. Plus, my favorite, flamethrower.
Oh yes, of course.
But of course, you don't get that. Actually, I don't think you get that till further along than we are. So, anyway, yeah, the bow and arrow. RIP didn't make the adaptation, probably won't. But also, it makes sense from a stealth standpoint. A bow and arrow is the best weapon for stealth. I don't even think there's a silencer in the first game. There's a few guns that look like they would have one, but ultimately you can't shoot them in close quarters without somebody hearing. So the bow and arrow is that solution. It's fun to see the animation where you string it and feel the tension in the haptic feedback, but it's predominantly because you're going through these large swaths of either infected or regular people and having to dispatch maybe a dozen of them without being seen. Without that being in the show, there's no reason for the bow and arrow. Also, I actually have a bow and arrow, the old school, like bows and arrows. Archery has come a long way for hunting. If you go to a proper archery shop, and I know this now, they're way different. There are all sorts of gears and things, and your adjustment level, your scope, all these things are possible with archery. But it was when I was doing the cosplay for Robin Hood, the Men in Tights version.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted like a regular old bow and arrow, and that was easy enough to come by just online, maybe eBay, without any of the accoutrement. But when I needed the custom arrows, I had to go to a proper archery shop that does like custom fletching, and I was just blown away by how high tech, like they've really upgraded bows and arrows to the 21st century here. But yeah, in the game it's just your standard, string back the bow. But I forget where I was going with that. But anyway, bow and arrow is cool, and RIP, but obviously it makes
not necessary for the show.
Not necessary for the show. So yes. The interesting thing for me about the whole buddy boy conversation, and Ellie is really trying to come across as competent and fierce. And what I love about Bella Ramsey's performance is you can see through it. Not necessarily David sees through it, because I don't think he does. But I think as the audience, don't you kind of start to see through that it's like she's projecting her voice more a little bit?
Yeah, I thought she was trying to lower it a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Like try to not sound as young.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So it's something that people in the audience who've spent a lot of time with Ellie watching this show so far would catch on to, which I thought was really brilliant. But like this conversation that she and David have in the building, I want to call it a building, but just like in the game, the roof is caved in the structure, in the ruins. I thought the conversation was amazing, and it in the video game, it's broken up by this huge infected horde, and like I understand why they didn't do that. But the conversation they had instead was amazing because again, they made David a preacher. So here's where you can find out what it was like when somebody who is a religious person has to say about the apocalypse, because the world ended, and he says, and then I found God.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was just a really interesting conversation, and Ellie's able to I she does warm to him. Again, like David's part of David's charm is in his presentation as a regular guy. And talking about the before times is a subject that no matter what, Ellie is going to latch onto and be interested in, because she is not old enough to have experienced it. She's fascinated with all things from the before time. So he's got her attention no matter what.
Right. And he said he found God after the apocalypse, but we learn later that it wasn't that he actually found God, it's that he turned to pretending to find God in order to assert his authority over these people.
Fair enough.
Which is really gross. But I mean, this whole scene and the whole early interactions between him and Ellie are all about him trying to build a connection, him trying to build some sort of trust, so that when they take out Joel is the plan, and Ellie hopefully comes with them. She does the things he wants her to, which gross.
Yeah,
And you see him trying to create that connection really, really early on.
it's hard to say like how much abuse he would have leveled on her had they gotten along. It's hard to
Mhm.
see if he would take her for like his wife or whatever weird stuff is going on. Like he threatens that later. If she like okay, and I also feel like I have to be careful here because sickos are sickos, and I think that there would be nothing stopping him from uh being as abusive as possible. But I like to Ellie at all times, no matter how she behaves, because he is that kind of person. I want to be clear.
Mhm.
But I think what I'm trying to say is, as he's getting to know her, and he has the upper hand here, he knows who she is roughly. He knows that
Right.
she's responsible for this guy's go. So he is trying to suss out in the earliest of conversations with her, whether his hunch is right and whether he can use her as a fellow leader. And I think, you don't necessarily shit where you eat. If he can't bend her will, he's ultimately still wants her as some kind of leader, fellow leader capacity. I think if he can make her drink the Kool-Aid, to coin a phrase, she'll be a fellow leader, and he won't be so alone. On the leadership side, like he says to her, "I want an equal," or he says that later. But that's really what this episode is as much about David and what David wants than what that whole group's deal is, because David's the one running it and essentially lying to everybody.
I don't think David would have actually sort of made her an equal or a leader with him, though. I think that is once again him sort of just adapting the message he's putting out in order to get what he wants. Personally,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
I don't think there was any sort of future where he and Ellie had any sort of equal standing over these people.
that's interesting because the types of people that he's, actively subjugating, and the girl that he slaps and says, "Don't be sad about your dad. I can be your dad." Like, hello.
Right.
But that you can't take on that kind of leadership role with Ellie though. Like he could never slap Ellie. Ellie would fucking kill him.
Hmm.
But maybe that takes some time. Maybe he would wear her down. This is some real dark stuff here. I'm grateful that as terrifying as these moments in the episode were, they're short-lived. Thank
Yeah.
God. And we
Yeah.
get past them. So there's that. But James Buddy Boy Troy Baker comes back with the meds, and he's got a gun on her. And here's another moment where David is calling the shots. He prevents James from killing her, and we get the meds that do save Joel. So it's like on the one hand, we hate that Ellie ever had to interact with these people. On the other hand, it was crucial for Joel's survival. She would not have just found penicillin in a nearby neighbor's house,
Yeah.
necessarily.
How ironic that she and Joel had to rely on penicillin to save Joel's life, which is based from fungus.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And again, the desperation in her voice when she says medicine, like she goes right to it.
Mhm.
Um, because David's like, we have boots,
Right.
which is, I could have gotten that back in Jackson. They have
Right.
boots too. Boots. Oh, good. My old one has a nail in it. Um, you know, crazy stuff. But yeah, so we get this scene. So Ellie is allowed a reprieve. David and James get the buck. They will be tracking her. She doesn't know that, but she's able to go to Joel. And the moment where she injects the penicillin into the wound, and she doesn't know what to do, and Joel can't tell her what to do. And I guess here's as good as any, right? Like, I love a medical expert's advice because they have to make this. Again, they wanted to make the injury itself more realistic than in the game where he falls 2 stories, would probably break his back totally and die.
Mhm.
I also am curious about when something like that is infected, like what I know everybody's different, but do you inject even on the site of the infection? I don't know these things, so I'd be interested in. I'm sure it'll come out
Yeah,
in general discourse, but the scene where she injects him and then crawls up next to him and goes to sleep is a very touching moment. You begin to
I
see,
love that.
yeah, you begin to see how much being around him comforts her. Even when he's not capable of being the protector and he's in the infirm here, she still kind of is just like choosing to be right next to him. And that's like how she feels safe, kind of.
Yeah, I also liked the sort of hesitation that she started that moment with. Like she lays down next to him and it seemed like it wasn't an immediate, I'm gonna lay down, put my arm down on his chest, like right next to him. It was like, okay, sort of testing the waters, like how does this feel? Okay, I'm next to him. Okay, now if I lay down, okay, that feels nice too. I put my hand across him. Okay, yeah, this feels right. And then that's how the scene ends. I like that it was a sort of a slow decision to see like how close she really feels to him in this moment, or how close their relationship has gotten over time.
Yeah, and that foreshadows the end, which is talked about in the post episode, behind the episode, where Craig Mazin points out that when Joel and Ellie are reunited at the end of the episode, she leaps forward and leans into the hug.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is the shoe dropping to the scene you just talked about, where she's like testing the waters. It's again that commitment to, okay, like, yeah, actively going forward and hugging you is going to bring me comfort. So it's really nice to see kind of that happen. And then again, when they're reunited, it just feels better.
Right, because I
Um,
mean, both Joel and Ellie have shown that they struggle with being honest with their emotions, especially when it involves love for somebody else.
yeah. Um, the interesting thing that is the same in the game, and I was kind of hoping that it wasn't adapted the same, is the death of the horse.
Oh,
Yeah, Ellie does find that people are coming. She does decide to lead them away. What an amazing scene in the show where she gives Joel the knife, and he's there, not conscious yet, really fully, but she gives him the knife to defend. He's like, he knows how to use it, surely, and he
mhm.
does. But she leads him away. If anybody had to kill the horse, I'm glad it was Troy Baker.
What a strange thing to say.
No, yeah, right. No, but like of anybody, I don't want an extra. I don't at least make it, somebody who I think of as being a human person, not with ill will in their heart. But I know it's fake. Actually, if you look at the behind the scenes, it's
Yeah,
really fake.
yeah.
That helps. And they did. There was another behind the scenes shot. I think I forget who posted it, but another shot last week or 2 weeks ago at the Eastern Colorado campus, and you see this rig, like the dummy horse on the rig, and the stunt doubles on it. And yeah, it's funny what they make look real.
I wonder if this was a surprise for Ellie. I wonder if she didn't expect the cruelty towards the animal. Like she was hoping to drive everybody further away from Joel. And it's like, if I get on the horse, I can get farther faster. And then they get farther away. Or if it is, if it was just like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say necessarily. I wonder if she was just thinking that, oh, they won't kill a horse.
Well, and I'll follow up on that because I think it works on many more levels even in the show. In the game, it's this actual pretty cool sequence where you're running through the town on the horse, and there's guys on the right, guys on the left. You have to choose the path that you're going through the town. And so people are trying to climb onto the horse while you're on the horse, and you're kicking them off. And it's this whole thing. Finally, after like 2 minutes of gameplay, you hear somebody in the crowd shout, "Shoot the horse!" And then they do. And it's like the most obvious thing in the show. That's just obvious. That's just the obvious, like, yeah, you're going to shoot. Like, what's the bigger target? First of all, if you're not, even if you're not that good at shooting, you're going to shoot
Right.
the thing that's, and then she gets thrown from the horse in the show, and that knocks her out, basically. She's completely incapacitated, and that could have real broken bones and injuries just from being thrown from the horse. So shooting the horse, absolutely the most obvious logical call, as sad as it is. But furthermore, in the show, we see how badly they need meat.
Right.
So there's that extra layer kind of showing their food deprivation and their starvation and kind of what they need to do. That horse was never getting out of this part of town once they had it. They just can't let fresh meat go when it wanders so willingly into their town.
Yeah.
You picking up what I'm laying down here?
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the Aragog scene in Chamber of Secrets. Anyway, so yeah, the horse was a goner, unfortunately. So that said, as they're approaching Ellie, they are going to shoot her. Again, how these people deal with loss and how these people deal with retribution is really interesting, and I want to talk about this scene because I find it very interesting. Why they choose to defy David here, because David is not immediately with them. They have a brief conversation among themselves, and it's like, do it, shoot her. Do you think that, obviously what we know by the end of the episode, it would be a mercy if they had just shot her versus the plans that David has for her, but they're choosing in that moment to subvert the will of their leader. Why? Is it because their sense of retribution is so great that they need the vengeance, which is, I think, what David ends up saying, because it's a safer option for him to accuse them of? Or is it because they, at this point, know that the only reason to keep her alive, or the only reason David has ordered her to be alive, is because of his selfish means, whatever that means?
Yeah, I can think of a few reasons. I think you just listed two great ones. The first being wanting to seek revenge for their dead friend. The second one that you also mentioned about, like, this guy's going to do gross stuff with her if she comes back with us. And then the third one that I can think of is purely selfish and, hey, my meal was so small last night, it's going to get smaller with her there.
Wow. So again, like kind of what I said about the horse, you're not just going to let
Yeah.
that go.
Yeah. And I didn't even necessarily mean it in the sense that they were going to eat her. I was just thinking about the food that they had was already
so no more.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
okay,
I mean
okay.
that's an extra level.
That's the
to
fourth.
be sure.
That's
Like,
the fourth
yeah.
reason. Yeah. Oh, more meat.
But I mean,
Yeah,
how many of them knew that they were eating human?
That's the good question, and
Yeah.
I'm glad it's not defined.
Yeah.
Obviously the butcher knows. James most definitely knows, because we seen if a couple people know, we see no one closer to David than James.
Right.
James knows. David knows. The butcher, whoever's cutting him up, knows.
By the way, because you're saying a lot of the names, how interesting that so many of the characters from this little group have biblical names.
I didn't notice that.
I don't know how intentional it was, and obviously these are all names that came from the game first, but there's James, there's David, there's Marco, which you could say is the sort of Spanish version of Mark.
Oh, goodness.
What was the name of the girl? The girl's name was, I have a cast list pulled up. Hannah, I'm pretty sure is a biblical name.
Okay.
Josiah was in a character. There's a Timothy. There's a lot of names that come from the Bible.
I bet that's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised.
And so that pastor angle is almost like an interesting retrospective kind of thing. I mean, obviously in the game, the only two named characters I believe would have been David and James, but then to create this whole community and then to make David a pastor makes it an even more intentional choice to have all these biblically named characters. I don't know.
Yeah, and David's up against a giant problem. Of
Yeah.
he's got just a stone and he's got to survive the apocalypse and lead his people through. What did you think of going back a scene and a half, him saying they came from Pittsburgh? How interesting was that? That they kind of fleshed out this backstory where David and his people, although they picked people up along the way, are from the QZ that we didn't get to that was instead made into Kansas City.
Right. Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says about how it fell in 2017. Like
Fireflies
it does
and
say another Firefly Fedra conflict. So
yeah.
that's really interesting.
Well, what was interesting too is the shout out to Fireflies, just because we've gone a few episodes where probably very few people know exactly who they are, what they are, but given the presence at the university, how we expected to find them last week, it's kind of bringing back, like reminding people, oh yeah, Fireflies, because it's been at this point 7 hours of show before we saw all those when you're lost in the darkness things. So,
Right.
good reminder there, and kind of just further world building that, like, David, if Elliot engaged with him, oh yeah, the Fireflies, we know them, we're looking for them, like he would have known all about them. So that's really interesting.
Hmm.
But yeah, so Ellie is captured. Joel is slowly on the mend, but is not going to make it to her in time for what's happening. And when Ellie wakes up in the cell, the moments I wanted the most out of the game were the I'm infected sort of distraction, because just like in the game, an amazing moment where she thinks to like bite him and then give him pause, but even in the game, just like in the show, it only buys her half a second of a distraction because she is about to be killed, and it's just the right thing at the right moment that allows her to escape, which is brilliant. It's done brilliantly, no notes. But this conversation, and David bears his soul and tells her that Ellie really is making it hard to keep her alive. But David is able to explain, just in the way we got more depth about Kathleen, what her whole deal is. David is able to kind of lay it all out for Ellie. There is a place for her here. And he's not up and saying that Joel is probably already dead. He says, oh, if that guy will leave, us alone, we'll leave him peacefully. I'll command it.
Hmm.
But he tells her she's alone. He tells her that no matter what, this is the beginning of a new part of her life. She has to forgive and forget, like leave the old part behind. And it's just a really interesting dynamic between the two of them, ever changing, ever growing.
Yeah. And when she takes that meat cleaver and kills
Troy Baker,
James,
our
yeah,
friend.
kills Troy Baker, um, and she runs away into the rest of the building, the cafe. Uh, David does take a couple shots at her, like in that immediate aftermath. I thought that was an interesting choice. I don't remember if that happened in the game or not, but like immediately after she kills James and she's running, he fires a couple shots and they miss, obviously.
Yeah, good old quick
Um,
draw. That guy,
yeah.
like, he had his gun out fast, and I really like that change. I think in the game he's pretty committed to toying with her.
Hmm.
From what you understand, it's more of a always a game to him there, whereas it was essential for this character that you see him drive like he really does want something other than to just toy with her and be a sicko.
Hmm.
So yeah, the shots, that was great.
Yeah, it was like a reflex almost to
Yeah,
seeing his friend get killed or whatever.
yeah,
But then right
absolutely.
after that, I mean, they go into the cafe and he's offering her the world again and saying, "Hey, you don't know how good I could be." Gross.
Yeah, it's gross for that reason, but it's also like that guy's maybe like main statement to the world, right? So here's the guy,
Hmm.
let's take him at surface level and not ignore the pedophilia, but like he's this guy who said, I had this darkness and I always knew I had this darkness. And it's been like the you don't know how good I can be. Saying that out loud is like decreeing to the world, I can fight this darkness within. He clearly hasn't. The choices he's made, have succumbed to, in the worst possible ways, the kind of man that he is inside. But that bad guys who think they're good guys kind of, thing, is really surfacing. And something that I find really interesting that's also in the game is, from day one, from moment one of Ellie being captured, she sees right through all of this stuff and is just like, no, no, actually you're very creepy. Like you've crossed the line. From she's able to just, she can never be his equal because he has fallen. Like she sees right through his facade, not just the manipulation of we could be leaders together facade, but the facade of this is not really a human being I'm talking to. This is a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, there's that scene where she's still in the cell and he's trying to sort of coax this relationship out of her. Yeah, she's disgusted by the cannibalism, but then also the way he places his hand on the bar of the cage, and she's like, "Oh, I see what you're trying to actually communicate to me." And she sort of plays along for a second, just long enough to get a hold of his fingers and snap one of them. And we get that great echo of the line from the game about how the girl named Ellie is the one who
Ellie,
broke his effing finger.
yeah.
Um, it's really good.
Yeah, that's great. But again, this guy was a teacher and it's like, dude, screw you. Like honestly, like this, like that he clearly was giving into, like when he became a teacher, it was for the wrong reasons, I think we can say. Um, so there you go. Um, but this moment, so I like that there's a better explanation. I meant to look up in the game, even though I just played it, how the place catches on fire. But in the show, it's because Ellie is throwing basically a burning log towards David. And what I love is not once and not twice, but like three times, David is shown to look at the burning drapery and kind of has to decide if this is the last day of his community, because this building represents, this is their worship hall. This is where
Mhm.
he delivers his sermons. And I think that there's a few moments of wordless where he like is pursuing her, but he's also looking at the fire and like it quickly becomes out of control. But like for a little bit there, I think he looks back at it like twice and could have maybe done something, torn the drapes down, something, and just decides to let it burn. And I just found that inner conflict that I was keying into to be very interesting and satisfying from like a standpoint of trying to gauge what this man is thinking. Do I let it all burn? Is today the day that it all ends? Kind of a thing.
Yeah, I noticed that moment of conflict too, and was glad that he chose his more animalistic tendencies, in the sense that it was a good moment of conflict. Um, and then decided to pursue Ellie and not just pursue her to potentially kill her, but to potentially do more. Um, and that makes Ellie's reaction and her vengeance in that moment all the more satisfying as she does get a hold of the meat cleaver as he's on top of her and lets him have it, to put it lightly.
Yeah, I agree it's satisfying. Like this is as audiences who've watched this show for 8 weeks, this is our little sister. This
Yeah,
is, and this is nobody, no matter who they are, should ever have to experience this terror that she has.
yeah.
And I think often of or when we were watching this, I was thinking about all the actors, I should say all the actresses that had performances coaxed out of them by directors in horror things. Like I'm thinking Shelley Duvall
In The Shining,
in
yeah.
The Shining. But we know from historical accounts and sort of follow-ups that they were legitimately being terrorized by their director.
Hmm.
Hitchcock too famously did this with Tippi Hedren on The Birds, and
Right.
probably dozens of others. Like just places where the environment was not a safe space for the actors, and that was how you get, that was like the director's like reason for being horrible, was so you could get the most authentic performance, etc. Well, I have no doubt in my mind that in contrast, this was probably one of the safest sets operating in 2021, 2022. And yet, Bella's scream of terror when David is right on top of her is probably the realest bit of acting and realest scream of terror that I've ever heard anyone give, male or female, no matter what the situation was. You believe how terrified she is, and holy shit, like just wow. that performance. And so it completely disproves the many abuses that have occurred on set because where like that performance that's one of the best, and it's heart-wrenching.
Yeah. I said that her getting her revenge was sort of satisfying, but in the same sense, this is the moment. That is the moment that brought me the most tears, was her returning the favor on top of David hacking away with the cleaver, and the rage, the anger, the maybe even the shame to a certain extent, like all the feelings that she's feeling in that moment and letting it out on his face or wherever she's hacking. It was really tough to watch, and not because we saw the violence, like the actual blood and guts and gore, but because of the emotions we saw in her face as she was committing those acts of violence, and the toll that it was taking on her emotionally to be in that position in the first place. That brought me a lot of tears. I was very distraught.
So that there's distraught tears to answer the beginning of the episode. Yeah, of
Which
God.
then turned to like, oh my gosh, this is so sweet tears within a couple minutes. But like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
well,
how it started.
because Joel is there. I like the change that we'll mention from the game to the video game. Joel shows up, and in the game, she has still saved herself. She's still managed to overcome David, and it's awful in the game because you only have your knife, and you can't just stab him once. You have to find him 3 separate times in the restaurant and get him before the cutscene finally plays. You do get the upper hand, you do get the meat cleaver, but in the game, Joel pulls you off maybe after the 15th slash. Joel
Mm-hmm.
pulls Ellie off because you're playing as Ellie at that point in the game. In the show, that scene is over, and she's left the burning lodge because she needs air, and she's left because she's just had this you know kind of out of body experience where she's had to defend herself, and it's just like recovering. And that's where, like, out in the snow, out in the clear, she has a few minutes or a few moments to walk, and then is approached, basically has like the reaction of, oh my God, somebody's like coming after me, to where she can finally break down and then find it's him, and then find comfort in that. But it's also kind of like, apart from like when you're saying heartwarming, it's like dad bringing the kid her school backpack, because he's like got her backpack, and I'm just like, here daughter, I bought you your school backpack, let's go off to the bus stop now, kind of a thing. I couldn't that was the vibe very much I was getting, of just like, oh yeah, the internet, or now the world's daddy, has brought his daughter her school backpack. Pedro Pascal, by the way, fully embracing all of the love he's getting for portraying Joel, and other father figures, concurrently now on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Uh,
uh, yeah, the way Ellie exits into the snow, she's clearly in shock, like having just gone through this really emotional, traumatic experience. Both the pursuit of David onto her, but then also the subsequent killing of David. And I like that we get that moment of her to come out and just sort of like not know what to do with herself, in the following moments of that act of violence. And then for Joel to sort of come up behind her and grab her is almost like, she starts crying in that moment. Let me go. She, in her maybe wildest nightmares, thinks that David somehow survived and is back and is trying to get her again.
oh God.
But for Joel to then turn her around and her to make that connection that, oh, this is somebody who's not here to hurt me, but somebody who loves me. And for her to just like jump into his arms and give him a real genuine hug. And then this is where the tears sort of turned again, was when Joel calls her baby girl. And that's what he called his daughter back in episode 1, as Sarah lay dying in his arms.
You'll notice,
So
on a rewatch, right when she leaps into his arms, the next shot of the camera is on him with her facing the other way, and his broken watch is right at her neckline and right in the shot. It's not hard to find. It's right there, and you're just like, wow, here's a man that has gone, full circle. And as Craig Mazin says in behind the episode, like, he hasn't said that to called anybody baby girl in 20 years. And
right.
so you get this really interesting setup. I know we're going into next week's episode is the finale, I'm devastated that it came so quick, but also so long. We've gotten so many good episodes and so much meat, but you really do see this full tilt of the characters here, and something that we can close our non-spoiler section with, but need to talk about was Joel's committing of violence in this episode. And I know
Right.
why we skipped over it, but I just realized, holy crap, we didn't talk about that. So Joel, kind of on his way to Ellie, but essentially not knowing where to go, has the scene that's also in the game where he presumably is going to have two people separate, independent of one another, point a spot on the map and say, "Oh, I'll kill the one who's the most truthful." Doesn't get to that. He just is there to torture and terrify. Is this what Ellie has brought back to life? Did you have half a moment where you're just like, would it have been better if Joel had died? Because here's this great. I mean, it's almost a trick question because we both know where it's all going and stuff, but like seeing Joel in full force here was an eye opener for me because I don't think, unless I'm very much mistaken, we don't see Joel commit this level of violence to this point in the show. But it's very much the style of violence that Tess was kind of intimating and pushing on Joel in the first episode. Like, Robert, like, I very much want you to hurt this guy. It's that level of, oh crap, Joel is back and he's fiercer than ever. And not only that, he has somebody that he's going to fight for to the end. But the efficiency with which he says, "I'm going to pop your kneecap off," to the guy, and you just believe it, is scary. This is no longer the internet's daddy. This is the world's like most terrifying, oh my God, what have we done kind of moment.
It legitimizes the comments that David and his people made about how Joel was this crazy man or this monster who killed this member of their community and left him for dead. And that's why they're seeking the revenge, because in their mind it was a sort of cold-blooded killing. And now we sort of see how cold-blooded Joel can be when he's trying to get something he desperately wants. And we get to see him try the same move that he did back 2 episodes ago as they were looking for Jackson, looking for Tommy still, with that couple that was living by themselves up in the
Oh, that's right.
woods, where he was
Yeah.
like, "Hey, your answer better match what she said."
Yeah.
But that wasn't a situation of desperation, and so it didn't resort to violence. But clearly, this is a moment of desperation. He doesn't know where Ellie is. He just knows that she's not there, and these people are here instead. And so he puts the fear of God in this man and says, "Your friend better have the same answer as you after you show me where we are and where this village is." And the guy shows him with the knife in his mouth, and Joel kills him right away. And the other guy says, "What did you do that for? He told you what you wanted." He says, "Oh, I believe him." Like,
Like, hey
when you
man,
put the right fear into people, you have no reason to doubt, I
well,
suppose.
and pain too.
Pain as well.
Yeah, but I think too, look, that we've talked at length on this podcast and on Thank You for Spieling, episode 1, where we review The Last of Us Part 2 video game. Shout out preview to that. But we've talked about how a lot of this stuff, the people that remain in this world are there by a set of rules. Everyone has different sets of rules, but this is a social contract. All of it is. It always has been. There's a meme I'm thinking of right now where it's like always has been. But the rules that Joel just breaks in the assumption, granted, he didn't say I'll let you live, but he did say your better answer. He gave these people hope that they would survive this encounter, maybe if they were truthful. They were truthful. Then Joel stabs the guy in the stomach and picks up the lead pipe to kill the other guy. Like, that's a breaking of the social contract. That there can be no higher infraction in this world than what Joel just did, essentially. But he's
Mhm.
doing it because that's what it takes to survive and
Do
find
you
his
think the
level.
3 men that he kills are the same 3 that were with the one that he killed in the last episode or 2 episodes ago?
It's hard to say. I want to go back and make because David said three of the 4 came back.
Yeah.
Obviously, the one they're indicating was the dad was the one that Joel breaks his neck. But I guess I didn't. realize, oh yeah, because she shoots kind of at them as they run away, but there's very much three
Right.
people alive. Yeah. It's possible, although it's unclear. Like I almost thought that David would have like not eaten them, but like that maybe they were sitting this episode out, um,
Mhm.
during these events, because the way that David gives them a choice of who is going to stay behind and kill Joel versus who's going to carry the horse, or drag the horse, whatever they have to do, leads me to believe that they weren't the people most directly involved with Joel in the first place.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. Certainly something for the internets to be figured out. But do you have anything else for the non-spoiler section of this episode?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay, good, good, good. Yes, as a reminder, the spoiler section is where we will talk about things happening or that do occur in later parts of the game and or its sequel. So if you do not want that, please stop the podcast now, but not before clicking like and subscribe on YouTube. This is the part where I'll play the little animation that I got. And also, if you're listening on audio, please follow us on Twitter. Chad is at Chadadada, Chadada, and I am at Spielerman, Spielerman. You can email us at the show. Thank you for spieling at gmail.com. This is, of course, thank you for sporing. We'll have at least one more episode next week talking about The Last of Us's finale. Some questions about whether it's airing on Friday or Sunday, which will be cleared up hopefully shortly. But they did air one of the episodes that was airing on Super Bowl Sunday. They moved it to the Friday prior. Given that next week is the Oscars, I wonder if they'll do the same. And if not, I know which one I'm watching.
Yeah,
Um,
same. Although I hope I don't
it'll
have to
be
make that choice. We'll see.
painful. Yeah, I also hope not to make the choice. Also, how shocking is it that this could all be over within 5 days
Oh my
instead
goodness.
of 7? Yeah,
That
that's the
is.
part that I actually tear. Like, I won't be sad if it's next Sunday or even Monday, because the idea of not having new shows of this every week is rough. But thank you all for listening. We're gonna move on to spoilers now. We'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Spoiler time! This is a section of the show placed behind a spoiler warning, because, as Pedro Pascal says,
some things must stay sacred.
if you don't want to be spoiled, keep the rest of the episode sacred, and we'll see you next week. Okay, cool. So, as in terms of a spoiler part to this episode, I'm gonna keep it pretty open-ended. I don't have anything specific except to say that we did talk last week in the spoiler section about how violent Joel would get to be in this episode, and also kind of thinking about overall what's to come with his violence. I like that there was some of it in this episode. First of all, because it's terrifying to see. Even Pedro Pascal as Joel being like so vicious is terrifying. But I think it perfectly tees up what's coming next week.
Yeah, I think it does for sure. And I mean, this is from the game, so like
Yeah.
that wasn't anything new as far as Joel's characterization,
Mhm.
but to see it in live action does add a new sort of visceral quality to it. And it certainly lends towards what happens in season 2 as well, or part 2, I should say, of the games.
Yeah.
The violence, and not just from Joel, but from Ellie as well. Something that David says about Ellie in this episode is that she has a violent heart. And we see that of all the things that David says that may or may not be truthful, this is one of the things that is true about Ellie, is that she does have a sort of violent streak, and when provoked will let it loose.
And Craig Mazin has been saying that about Ellie since episode one's Behind the Episode, where he said that Ellie is enthralled by Joel beating the Fedra officer up to save her at the end of episode one. And that is the word, like enthralled, that she is fascinated by violence. And, now we see actively taking part in it. We understand why. But for Joel, this does answer the question, how far will he go to now protect Ellie and this daughter figure, this surrogate daughter of his? I'm surprised. Even though it's part of the game, does it diminish next week because you no longer have the shock necessarily of seeing this Joel, TV's Joel, being just absolutely will stop at nothing to save her?
No, I don't. I think what we can expect next week, and I still don't like the idea of completely spoiling the ending, especially because it may not be the same, and we can talk about that too.
That's true too.
But I think that the violence that we can expect based on the game next week is similar, but also comes from an entirely different place, because the people in this episode are trying to kill Joel, and that isn't necessarily the truth in the next episode.
I'll do you one further. I think that the people in the next episode, and now I'm kind of catching on to like your uncertainty about spoils.
Yeah.
But the people in the next episode also have a better moral high ground than the cannibals in this episode. And a reason for being a barrier to Joel that this episode doesn't come close to. So we'll say that.
Right. And to listeners out there, I mean, obviously we are behind a spoiler section, but there are certain spoilers that I do think are truly sacred. And I don't want anybody to be like totally spoiled just because they listen too far in the podcast. I don't know.
Looking into behind the episode, this thing that Craig Mazin says that I specifically latched onto is that this moment with David where she kills him is this inciting moment, this moment where she becomes broken as a person, this moment where something snaps. I want to quote him as accurately as possible without reviewing it, what it is he actually says. Something within her snaps, and it's unknown whether she'll be able to piece it back together or will be forever changed. Yes, we know that's how trauma happens, but knowing that the trajectory of The Last of Us 2, the game, which also deals with some of these same themes surrounding Ellie, given what Craig Mazin was saying about Ellie snapping and this moment being the inciting incident in essentially a more violent Ellie or a more just vicious Ellie, who's more in touch with her violent heart, what do we make of Mazin kind of highlighting and spotlighting this moment as the moment where Ellie broke bad?
Well, when they made the first game, it's not like they already knew what they were going to do in the second game, or even if there was going to be a second game. In fact, I think Druckmann has said in the past that they originally didn't have plans for a second game. It was just sort of like something that came with time and perspective. So now that the show is being made and we already have the second game, we already have Left Behind, so we have that additional Ellie characterization, they can take some of the elements that we see in part two and set it up. Not to say it was set up poorly in part two, but they can set it up even more properly here by giving us those early tendrils, those early hints towards the kind of character that Ellie can be and the kind of violence that she can perpetrate when properly provoked.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's actually a great point of, it's easy to say now that this moment will have repercussions moving forward, not just because it's obvious because that's how trauma works, but because part two exists. Like exactly what you're saying. So it's so I like that. Of all the discussions, and Craig and Neil are always talking about how long they talked about one particular aspect, how many conversations they had, plural, of any one aspect. This idea that this moment with David was a turning point is a really exciting later development. Later just meaning, obviously it wasn't necessarily they were thinking it's going to be anything when the game, was first being made. So Yeah, that's very exciting to me. Talking about Craig Mazin and lines of his, the official podcast after, was it episode 2, when Tessa's death, and there's the kiss, that the infected man kisses her. And
Mhm.
Craig was going on about fungus is a life form and it populates, and the kiss is just like fungus loves, man. Fungus just loves, Craig says. That's David's line in this episode. He tells Ellie that the fungus loves, that it cares for its own. What an interesting Easter egg for Mason to have dropped.
It's true. And I mean, similar to what
Okay.
we had talked about before as well, which is its similarity to a virus, which its only purpose is to perpetuate and to repopulate and to infect others for the purpose of survival. So
Well, an interesting
to tie that to an emotion like love, which is genuinely thought of as so pure, is really interesting choice, and is another theme that they've talked about in the official podcast about how that sort of pure love can be a positive thing, but can also turn sour and be a negative thing that can lead to atrocities, to put it one way.
And I guess also faith is that way too, as in like,
Mhm.
the Crusades or whatever.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And like faith being used. Well, it's just so interesting because I think David also say something like, I didn't find God after the apocalypse. Cordyceps is basically his God, essentially, he's talking about. Like that was the thing that made David see the light, so to speak, was cordyceps. Like, it's so interesting seeing what we know of scientifically as a fungus being elevated to like a reverent or a reverence of like a deity kind of a thing.
Mhm.
But if it ended the world, it's equally as powerful as anything humans have seen, in terms of like, if that brought about the end of the days that was foretold in the Bible, no matter what religion you're in, then it's equatable to God, right? Or it's equatable
Right.
to something that is sanctioned by God because it is part of the plan.
Right.
So really not expecting that kind of high level discussion in this episode about some cannibals, but also I'm thrilled that it's in there because the reasons that we tell ourselves and these people, tell themselves to keep going and be able to keep going, and the interconnection of faith and what David's doing in being a shepherd, actor Scott Shepherd, shepherding these sheep around, kind of does make perfect sense in that we're all complicated beings. One final thing before we wrap this week, and that is one aspect of looking forward to the next week's episode. I think based on what happens in the game, we'll be getting a return of Merle Dandridge, but she is being kept from the preview. What we do see, and I haven't screenshotted or anything, but I'm sure it'll be much more of a sequence, is the appearance of the other half of the video game dynamic duo, which is Ashley Johnson. And there have been some spoilers for some time on the internet about what role both Troy Baker in this episode and Ashley Johnson eventually in some episode would be playing. The theory, and at this point it's all but actually have been aired live, Ashley Johnson will be playing the mother of Ellie. And the thing I want to ask specifically, because we're going to be seeing the circumstances leading up to Ellie's birth, it seems to be that in the preview of next week, there's a shot. You can't really see that she's like pregnant or super pregnant or anything, but Ellie's mother is being chased by an infected person that's crawling across the floor, like a woman who's infected. Could we speculate that the reason for Ellie's immunity has something to do with the circumstances surrounding her mother being attacked so late in the stages of her pregnancy, and or maybe even being like almost in labor? Maybe this like also causes her to be in labor. If Ellie's mother gets bitten and dies, could the infection being delivered in that way, obviously the mother and a newborn infant connected through the bloodstream and all that other stuff, do we think that are they going to give the midi-chlorian kind of level example of why the infection is on this next episode?
Yeah, that's definitely what I put in my notes, was that maybe they're giving us a reason for Ellie's immunity, or a reason to speculate what could have caused Ellie's immunity. Um, I don't know how I feel about that. It just depends on how it's executed, I guess. But I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Oh, we will find out. Obviously, there's only one episode left, but
Yeah.
I don't know which answer I prefer. If it's her just cowering in fear, maybe sacrificing herself, having already given birth to Ellie to
Right.
sort of protect her or something, or if it is a sort of I'm still pregnant, and then she gets infected, and that somehow creates an immune child. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question if that's the way they go with it, but I also would want them to do it right, and I have no doubt that they would. So
Oh,
I'm not
yeah.
too worried about it either way.
It's so interesting because if Ellie is, I would say not special. Obviously, Ellie is very special. The thing about her being this potential savior for all of humanity works very well against how important she is to Joel because she's Joel's savior, like a personal savior.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the interplay there. But if Ellie is the way she is because of the circumstances surrounding her mother, like giving birth after being bitten or whatever we speculate might happen, if that is why, then you can actually probably recreate that in future, like it means that Ellie is not unique or the only possible future person that may be immune to this virus
That's true. And
or
I
fungus.
wonder like what the circumstances of us seeing this flashback are. Like, is this something that Marlene witnessed somehow? Do we think, gosh, I think this is something that I'd almost rather talk about not recording just because of
Yeah,
some of the specific details, but
absolutely
it
fine.
it does raise some really interesting questions. Like, what are the circumstances in which we're seeing this flashback? Is it going to be like the opening episode flashback?
Mm.
Because it's not from a perspective of a character that we already know, or is it going to take place later during the episode from the perspective of Marlene, or it wouldn't take place from the perspective of Ellie? That wouldn't make sense. Um,
Like
so yeah,
yeah. Yeah, it's not the Ben episode of Lost, the first one, which it like shows his birth and it's like a Ben flashback. But anyway, um yeah, I just thought that was really interesting to think about because seeing that happening next week is going to be very, very moving. We're going to have a lot of feels. And I think with that, we bring a close to our 8th episode of this event series podcast. Thank you for sporing.
thank you all for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. Truly, thanks from the bottom of our hearts to everyone that's been with us and everyone in the future that's going back to this. Hopefully, preview to season 2 that will have been announced and casting and more info. The thing is, we can always come back. This is being put out on my this podcast feed that I paid for 2 years without using. So, I'll keep paying and I'll keep using it. And whenever we can, we'll do more sporings after next week. But it won't be I think it's safe to say we're gonna, take a break for a while,
Yeah.
doing this until whenever. But next week, certainly we'll be here. Maybe same bat time, maybe same bat channel. Like and subscribe, email us, let us know, reach out on Twitter even, say you're enjoying the show. And if not, we know you are because you're listening every week. So thank you. And we'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Endure and survive.